improvise for a minute.
Sandy can. Yeah, he can act. We're live.
All right, I'll call the December 13th Planning Commission meeting to order and note that the
Skeleton.
public has been duly notified in accordance with state law. While we wait on the chair and vice chair, you will want to, maybe we could do the approval of the minutes and then talk about the comp plan while we wait on them for stormwater.
I vote yes.
All right,
Second.
motion on the approval, on the minutes?
Yes.
Yes, as written.
Oh, on the minutes, yes.
Second.
Suzanne moved to approve. Sandy seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, moving on to comprehensive plan review and update. You have in your packet a draft that Suzanne and Matt have been primarily working on. And I think, Suzanne, I think you have simplified things by taking out all the red lines, because I think at one point it was pretty well full, remove, replace, move around, so it all ended up being in some color-coded fashion, so I think it,
I just pulled it right out of the document and sent it separately, so
Yeah.
you guys could.
any comments, I guess, from you, Suzanne, or things that you think the group should know or talk about specifically?
I just wanted, well, one of my comments is I wanted to make a mention that we put at least the 10-year capital improvement plan in there as reference. And that would put it, I believe, at Appendix G.
Okay,
I wanted to tie that plan in a little bit tighter, but I think the way it is now, and as long as it's dragged on, I think that can be done at a later time and just facilitate the document to get it out the door, up to council.
Yeah, that
So-
is well done. I didn't, yeah.
so I think
that's
if we include the 10-year capital improvements plan, we'll just have to include the year version of it. You know,
Yes.
knowing that it's kind of a living document, you pick it up 4 years later. So
It
we'll
can
just,
be inserted too every year,
I don't know that technically it can. So I think we would just
updated.
update. I think we would put the date, and then this group updates it every few years, so we would just, that's part of the challenge of this plan, is it does become somewhat static.
Right.
Because it's the comprehensive plan, to make changes to it takes 2 readings of city council. Any edits to it is pretty major. Can't be kind of a living document that changes with time. So we would, I think, put it in there. We could even reference that a current version is probably at iop.net if you wanted to look at it. So I think we would, I don't know, I don't know that we've done that in other places, put in like a plan that changes frequently.
I
But I
have
don't-
seen them, I'm sorry, excuse me, Douglas, I've seen them where you can update them, and it ties back to say once the capital improvement plan is done or updated, it automatically just kind of hops over to the comprehensive plan to update those numbers. And I'm trying to find which municipality did that. I didn't write it down, but it would make it more of a dynamic, less static document. The rest of the chapters in there would be the same.
Well, on here, it references the timeframe, ongoing, as new plans are adopted,
Right.
meaning IOP.net, I guess, could be a footnote, annually, prioritize capital improvements projects across all plans. That's a time frame. It's annually. So in my mind, I was thinking, well, you need, if you're reading this and what you're looking for, you need to look for the updates, once even monthly.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's, I
I
mean,
think
that
it
certainly
covered-
is a way to do it. I think, Suzanne, you were saying it would actually be, there would be a plan that would be a technical part and appendix of this document. And I don't know that you can, I don't know that we can do that.
Okay.
Have this document kind of auto update each year. But I don't know that that's, you know, it's a 10-year plan. It's very, very long range. It doesn't change a lot every year. So from my perspective, you guys are looking at it every few years. Then would be a good time to update all the appendices.
I mean, from the comprehensive plan standpoint, it's kind of more that you have a process for updating the 10-year plan.
Right.
And that's, even though that's a separate process, it's like that, and I think that's what we're trying, kind of pointing out, is there is that process in place.
Right.
It updates annually, so we can put a copy of the current one as an example, but it's not something you would reference to update, because you would update the 10-year plan through that cycle. So I mean,
And that's, I think, to Sandy's point, you're kind of referencing that there is an annual plan out there. If you want to see the latest and greatest, go to
go to
IOP.
that, if you just want to see what's it
You wanted to
contains,
see
you
the-
look at the appendix.
Yeah. And it won't be drastically different, I can tell you that. I mean,
Right.
they get tweaked each year and things get shuffled around in terms of, is it gonna be 3 years on the out or is it 5 years on the out? So it does get tweaked, but it's a pretty consistent kind of format and plan. So this was the last element?
That's it.
Yep. If everybody,
Seriously?
yep. There will be a process of kind of putting it all together. And then it'll go through an entire approval process with city council. The plan would be that we've kind of identified, I think we've talked about this, a graphic designer who does the town of Mount Pleasant's, some of their, not comp plan, but some of their plan documents, to kind of just add graphical interest and kind of make it more appealing to the eye, but they keep the text the same. So what I would propose is that we, if you all are comfortable with it, that we make a recommendation to forward the draft, call it a draft, we'll give it to them in red line form, give it to them as is to city council, just so they can see the plans. There's been a lot of work, a lot of changes made. So kind of give it to them, potentially have, and I don't know if we want to do a joint meeting with them, just run through at a high level all of the changes, get feedback. If it sounds like, you know, there are more points that they want to see work on, we'll go back on those points. But if not, we'll get it into a prettier kind of package to be presented for final approval at some point down the road. But that, I'd kind of suggest an initial pass off and meeting of the draft and get comments back on the draft, and then do one final kind of editorial and clean up and beautify pass, and then an ultimate recommendation, if that works for you all.
I so moved.
Everybody good with that?
Perfect.
Yeah, sounds
Yep.
good.
Does anybody else want to second that? Everybody just said yes, but.
I'll second.
Second.
So this is a recommendation to pass the draft on to city council for their consideration and recommendations, knowing that a follow-up final version will be forwarded. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I think we're gonna have to, you wanna have a quick discussion on the stormwater plan changes without our other members? You wanna hold it? What's your,
You all right, David?
I didn't really have any,
Right?
concerns, questions. I didn't know if anybody wanted kind of explanation of what some of this.
Yeah, and I guess I'll, just as way of
Kinda.
introduction,
Went through it, and these are just the changes we had,
yeah,
I think, all agreed to.
yeah, I think this is pretty much what we agreed to. Matt and I took a stab at a draft. We circulated it to David, Marty, and Ron to get their feedback. David, and I think, David, this version includes your suggestion. And to kind of just go through in concept, we'll start at P. The change in P, and I'm on, it says page 3 of 3, I'm not sure what,
Yes.
but it's a red line with the first red line changes. In P, we have, that's the section that says you can't build any higher than 1 foot above the road. But we've added basically an out for very low lots, and we've said that in any situation, you could always build at least to 7.4 feet. The concern there, and we've had this happen, is a property is located on a super low road that's getting inundated by high tides frequently. Our current code would require that they stay down close to that road and only be 1 foot above the road. This change would say, okay, we're gonna allow you to at least always go to 7.4. And I will tell you, I'm not positive where 7.4 for us came from Davis and Floyd. So that's why it's in here. The city has a lot of drainage projects, and we're stopping up a lot of pipes with flapper valves that do bubble up. We have found that 7.1 is a pretty magical number in terms of being above where tidal water will get to with any regularity. We think if you're at 7.4, you would have been safe for the last 30 years except for Hurricane Hugo. So I think from my perspective, it seems to pass the smell test of being a good number to not require people to be lower than. And again, this is kind of in anticipation of sea level rise. We're having more high tides. We're having tides into people's yards. So this would be in response to that.
And this really only applies to lots that are 6.4 feet or below.
That's correct.
Now.
It's really just the lowest lots. That's right. There's not a lot that are that low. I mean, in our review, it's pretty rare. I know that there's a subdivision that got approved and a bunch of houses were built. They were in that range. So it has happened, but it's pretty rare. So,
Quick
yeah, go ahead.
question. Will that be somewhat alleviated now that those flapper valves are going in
Should be.
off a waterway there for
Yeah.
that ditch, basically, is
Yeah.
what flooded it?
Yeah, it should be. We are putting flapper valves in places that will stop the water coming through the pipes, but there are a lot of locations where the shoreline is also just so low that it's gonna continue to come through the banks. You know, an example of this is 25th Avenue. We just put a series of flapper valves in there. It's much better. And now, when water comes up, tides come up, they no longer enter into the end of 25th, but eventually, and when they get to probably 6'5", 7 feet, they then come in from the side, so through neighbors' yards,
Right.
and then get into there. So if your lot's really low, even if you have a flapper valve, there is the potential that it will get around the valve and come in through some other path. Same is true for the subdivision back in, kind of behind the Harris Teeter, the 19th Myrtle area. They also have, comes up through the pipes, but it also starts coming in from just the shoreline and neighbors.
Okay.
We're trying, part of what Davis and Floyd's work did was to kind of fortify the shorelines, but that has, and we're trying to kind of do those as time, as we can, but it's a complex, you know, we gotta get, partnership with private individuals to do their part. So it's a long-range project, but we do have that under works.
Thank you.
So Q, we have it in our current code that you cannot decrease an existing lot's elevation. Probably not a great idea to dig lower, but I think the thought was is that if you really strictly interpret that, you couldn't kind of depress an area, which I think later in the code we'll see we're talking about creating depression. So that part is planned to be deleted, so you could excavate out onto a property. R, and R is really the meat of the changes here. Right now, just to refresh everybody's memory, the city requires a plan that is, that's done by a landscape architect or a civil engineer. And as long as it's not more than a foot above the road, and they include a certification statement that says if you do the work in accordance with this plan, it will not adversely impact neighbors. That satisfies us for building permit purposes. This language would change that. Same general kind of logic there, that we're going to put the onus on the designer but it gives more, gives a little bit more kind of bite to those, and it explains that the lot should not be modified in a way that would create greater volume or higher velocity of stormwater running off the site. So it used to be kind of up to the designer's interpretation of what would be damaged. This would now say you really can't change the volume or the speed at which water leaves the site. It also there's a second sentence there that says that the improvements, so the designer would have to certify that the improvements are designed such that post-runoff construction will not exceed pre-construction hydrology for the site, and the improvements will not adversely impact adjacent property. So again, kind of giving more definition there for what the professional is supposed to be certifying. We have taken out pools. We had that discussion that pools should be catching water and not contributing to stormwater problems. And then we have added the final requirement, and it's something that we now are doing on kind of a case-by-case basis, and we've left it in there with the word may. But it puts people on notice that the zoning administrator may require as-built documentation certifying that the project was completed in compliance with the stormwater plan. So somebody submitted a plan, we approved it. This gives us clearly the tool to go back and say, okay, you now need to have that checked and verified back to us that you followed the plan.
What might trigger your requiring that?
Now we do require it if there's any question really in our final inspections.
Neighbors complaining after?
Neighbor complains, we see something that doesn't quite look right to us.
Right.
Sometimes it's kind of, we can clearly see it's a non-issue, but other times like, not really. And things are so flat. I mean, it can be challenging to go out there and look at a flat lot and determine where that water's going and how quickly it's going. I think we've bounced around the idea of just making it required.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit onerous if it's, it's a 1 acre lot with a little house on the middle of it, completely flat, definitely no change. To require that owner to have an engineer or architect go back out there might be a little overkill, but so we've left it as may currently. Again, we've kind of thought about making it shall, and I think maybe at a minimum we could make that judgment at the front end when we see, okay, you're a small lot, you're covering a lot of it, and then have that judgment made at the beginning of the project of, you need to just plan on having this certified at the end.
I'm just thinking of some of the ranch homes throughout the cross streets in particular. I think it really gets low from the center or the waterway end of 31st, 32nd, then you're into the forest trail, and they all have that winding ditch behind them, and it floods. And if you go to elevate a home, I'm just thinking out loud, you're gonna wanna fill a little bit on some of those lower ones. I know in the back corner back there,
Yeah,
some of them.
so, and so that kind of gets back to the idea of, we were holding people to a low
Right.
elevation, where we have elsewhere said, okay, you're gonna be allowed to elevate it. But the suggestion from Davis and Floyd, and it seemed a little bit complex, but it was this system of, if you're gonna mound up a certain volume, you need to provide an exact offsetting recession of the same volume. That
Like
seems,
a rain garden or something
Yeah.
to collect, and
we haven't been that specific, and what we're suggesting, or what's gonna be required. We've given them a little more latitude of, doesn't have to be exact volume, but you need to be able to calculate and prove that it's not gonna adversely impact your neighbors.
I'm just,
So-
again, I'm thinking out loud that I know there's some houses back there. Over time, some of those owners are gonna move out, and others are gonna wanna build something a little more substantial and elevated.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of our environment. And they're gonna wanna add fill to get to that 7
Yeah.
feet 4 inches, and they aren't there now. And we are a little contradictory. You can go here, but you can't go there. You can fill, it says here, but then down here it says, no, maybe you can't. So I just,
Well, I mean, basically you can fill, but you gotta account for the effects of your fill of the neighboring properties. So it goes back to putting in either like a rain garden or a retention pit as part of that fill effort, because if you don't, you're gonna flood out the neighboring house.
Yeah, and I guess,
And that's the
or
concern, I
increase
think.
runoff to the road.
yeah.
We're not saying you can't do it, we're just saying
Yeah, yeah.
you've gotta
Oh, no.
absorb the cost of the effects of doing it too. You
So-
can't just fill and push your problem to the neighbor.
so I think
Well, that's my
Same.
concern, is
Yeah.
that you, all of a sudden, you wanna do it, and you wanna get it where it doesn't flood, if you will,
Yeah,
and your neighbor's gonna flood as a result.
right.
And that's
so-
what we're trying not to have.
Yeah, so
Right.
you're the low house, and you come in and you fill and push where all that water used to sit on your property now
Yeah.
next door. That's kind of what we're not allowing, that you,
So, and I think we've wrestled with a little bit with what Sandy is suggesting, and to take it to the extreme, and that's kind of where things naturally end up. If you have a property, if you buy a property that has always been a low collecting, so you've always accepted everyone's runoff,
yeah,
Including the road.
including the road. If you take this language to its kind of ultimate conclusion, if your runoff has been 0, are we saying that you forever have to be kind of your neighborhood's retention bond, because you historically have been? And I think the ordinance, the way it's written, is saying, yes, you do.
to some extent, how you said that is, if you've always been collecting, really you have a negative runoff. And what we're kind of saying is, okay, you can make it 0, but you can't push your runoff now somewhere else. You just push your neighbor's runoff back to their property. I don't know if read it that way or whatever, but that's kind of,
Well,
that's kind of where we're going with that question is.
you can't alter it so that it results in a greater volume or higher velocity running off the site. So I think if you were a negative,
Which I don't think you normally consider a negative, runoff when you do.
Do you
the
think you can get
calcul-
it up to zero?
Zeros, yeah, it's like I have no runoff from this property, it can be zero. I can't make it negative per se. I don't think that's kind of a,
Yeah, we wrestle.
that's more of an interpretation kind of thing, but I would interpret it as, yeah, you would not create, your property does not create negative runoff.
Yeah,
Um,
we wrestle with that a little bit.
Yeah,
Like, do you have to be, if you bought, and I guess if you bought the low point, maybe you have to continue to be the low point. I think that's,
It might be, yeah. Okay.
or at least provide offsetting volume that is continued. And I mean, those are the examples that become problematic. Somebody's property always ran to their neighbor. Somebody puts a wall up and it stops it. Now it collects on their side. It obviously impacts the person who always ran the water there. We're gonna say, no, if it's, you're basically gonna have to keep.
accepting water. I don't know if I would agree with that statement, but.
I kind of don't, but it gets back to the pre-construction. The improvements are designed such that post-construction runoff will not exceed pre-construction hydrology of the site. You know, you're not looking at a virgin site anymore, so that's kind of what we're talking about. If you have a problematic house and you want to make additions, you are going to look at improvements designed such that post-construction runoff will not exceed your current problematic situation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Well-
know what an answer would be other than I think what we've talked about. I think the rain gardens or some sort of catch system might be practical. And I have I have a property on mine, and I know it's always been kind of the neighborhood catch-all in Forest Trail. And it is, I mean, if you dig to plant a rose bush, you've got groundwater
Yeah.
right now. It's that
Right.
low constantly. And somebody's gonna buy that, and they're gonna wanna improve on that system. But the neighbors are, you know, they're not higher, they're
Also.
almost the same elevation.
So do you think we need clarification that nothing,
I think this does what we want. It's spelled out, and you still
seems like we have a
have,
little conundrum with accepting the neighborhood's water.
Yeah,
And maybe
Yeah.
we don't wanna say, in a negative situation, you have to always maintain the same acceptance rate of water. Cause I think, I'm hearing you all say that you don't necessarily feel that way. If somebody's always been low, they've always accepted it, that we don't wanna force them to continue to have to accept it.
I would hope that we could improve on that.
That's where surface water studies come in so well. I mean, you can probably find a happy medium to that one site that collects them all. You can just see where the water comes from. And between French drains and whatnot, you could probably escape some of that stuff.
True.
In a public, we're not gonna make that private individual create a system that manages the whole neighborhood's water.
No,
The
but,
public
right.
stormwater system is
Because
what
it
you're referring to.
benefits such a large group of people, but now that lot, some, private entity is now taking on that lot, and you have to look at the cause and effects of it and what they're gonna do and raise it.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, I mean, from a practical application, if that were to happen, there was a low point, the owner stopped accepting any water from their neighbor. They didn't increase it, but they basically said, I'm gonna hold mine, the rest of the world needs to hold theirs. If that resulted in a problem, a public problem in the public road. Now, it wouldn't be something the city would address for their neighbor. But I do think, I mean, that's what Robert does, day in, day out, he would find a solution. And of course, sometimes those solutions are expensive, but it kind of gets on the public list of
Right,
future projects. We're dealing with a situation like that on Palm between 38th and 40th, 41st, where there's just not a system. All of the water runs to the shoulders of Palm. There's nowhere the water can go, but it's in the public realm. We'll kind of develop I mean, it's a very long-range plan, but there's a plan that would deal with that water eventually. So maybe that's the right path forward.
Well, there's an area on Carolina and Second Avenue too, where it just comes in off the road, off of
that's true.
Carolina and down Second, and it'll.
The
go
ditch
ri-
behind,
If you come down Second Avenue towards, Charleston, that, once you get past, you get to the corner,
There is,
Yeah.
everything starts to go down.
Yeah,
And
behind
it comes from
200
the
Carroll.
house
Yeah.
that's up on the hill, comes down Carolina, makes that turn onto Second Avenue, and then just flows into the backyard or that ditch.
yeah.
Ditch to nowhere, I guess, is really what it is.
I
Right
think
there,
that
Collection
ditch goes
ditch.
out to, by the,
I don't think it goes anywhere. It just fills up.
doesn't go under the road.
Well, it drained out to the Hamlin Creek.
I did too, that it went to the,
I don't know, maybe, because they filled part of it in.
yeah, just recently, kind of behind, yeah, that system does eventually,
Because
I
that
can't
comes right
recall
out
if
there at
that's
the,
the
at the
Exchange
intersection of-
Club,
Yes.
Charleston
there's a
and
big
Outfall?
drain there, Yes.
is that, I think that may,
Yeah.
I
I
could,
don't know. Because that drain right there on Second Avenue fills up, it doesn't go anywhere. Unless it just seeps out of cracks.
so I will say,
There's an
I,
outfall, but right there at the Exchange Club's
in the parking lot, right?
Yes, off of Second Avenue. It's right, yeah.
Now, I will
between
tell you-
Cable's Dock and the Exchange Club.
I happen to know that that ditch is not there's no easement there, there's no public,
That was just a builder's ditch, I guess.
yeah, those owners kind of had a low spot that ultimately fed into a public system that's along Second, but I think Sandy's right, that it goes down Second and ultimately out through the Exchange Club's lot.
Okay.
I will have a map of it.
Because it's a low area right there.
Yeah,
And that water will flood.
Yeah,
It's
so
in
that lot owner there on Carolina, as you come to that stop sign on Second there's like 3 or 4 lots there on Carolina that are lower than Second even.
Right.
So it flows down to there.
Well, you can see it, it'll come right down Carolina, and there's a house that's up on a hill. And all that water comes screaming down that driveway onto Carolina and right down in that area. But if they could divert that water off the street around that corner to the ditch and to the drain would be, I guess that would be better. But, that's, all that water accumulates in somebody's yard on that corner. Whether it be the 200 Carolina or the next door neighbor on going down, I don't know what that address is.
oh, on that side of Carolina, so the side opposite of yes. And in that backyard, I think you're right.
It's gotten better over the years, but it used to flood out pretty good. So I don't know if anyone wants to, would accept that accumulation of water. Yeah, that would be a real detriment to.
To that
selling
owner.
property.
So I think I'm hearing consensus that we want that wording of R to be clarified to say, we're not gonna make you accept, nothing would make you accept the public,
Yeah. And like, it's only an issue when it really rains hard.
yeah.
It's not all the time.
Do you all,
But I think, like Sandy said, it's an ongoing thing. Make improvements as new technology, better science, I guess. But I don't know if I'd be in for a rain garden in the backyard. with
I mean,
snakes
again, I
and
think it's more of how do you interpret what you have written? Because you're saying, a greater volume running
Well, so-
off the site. If I'm preventing water from coming onto the site, that's not that's not violating, I wouldn't see that violating anything you've got written.
So I guess you would say that leaves you at you can go to 0.
You can go to 0. If you've historically collected all the water, you can go to 0, but you still can't push any of your water off.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Is that how we want to keep it? If you're at 0
I
or
mean-
negative, you have to stay at 0?
Yeah, I don't know if you need to iterate and make that more clear, but that's kind of, I mean, that would be sitting here reading it over and over. I would read it that way,
That you could go
Yeah,
to 0,
that you could go to 0, but you can't,
go to 1 gallon per hour.
yeah.
I suspect over time, you and others, as they're in your position, over time, this will probably get adjusted again at some point as the need shows for it to be reconsidered some other fashion. I don't know how to fix it at any.
I mean, I
more
think,
than-
yeah, again, it's kind of like it's been a historic that we've allowed people just to push their water off onto the neighbors. And now we're saying the neighbor can stop it, and you may end up having to come back and fix a problem that you caused, or a property owner caused 30 years ago.
Right.
So we have always allowed people to stop it. It
Yeah.
irritates the person whose water gets stopped, but we have had to deal with that throughout the years, and we've always kind of said, and I think there's case law that tells us that we couldn't really do anything to the contrary.
Right.
If somebody says, hey, my neighbor's running all his water onto me, I'm creating a wall, I'm stopping it, I don't know that we could, I think there is case law that allows that he can do that. I mean, I guess we could pass an ordinance that says you can't stop it, but I don't know that we would want to do that.
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking we wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't.
I think it would be problematic to tell somebody you have to continue to accept whatever your neighbor runs to you. So, sounds like people are generally kind of okay with it. Do you, I guess, this is our last meeting with this group. In January, you will have, Marty will not be here. I think that's it. I think we just said we'll have one new member. Any reason to not just wait until January to finalize the recommendation, or do you wanna,
I think we should
wait till January?
especially when Ron is here.
Okay.
And
He deals with it pretty
Mhm.
closely. Everybody agreeable to that?
Sure,
agree.
that sounds fine. Yes.
All right, the only other thing on the agenda is to appreciate Marty.
But we can't.
We can still appreciate it.
So
You're out there, Marty.
I'll tell him to log on to the YouTube
We're all waving.
and take note of how much we appreciated Marty's work.
AKA Johnny Depp.
Yep. I don't have anything else unless you all do.
Yeah,
That's it.
appropriate to adjourn, I so move.
I second.